Good evening and namaskar. Welcome on behalf of the Bombay Management Association. As always, for this Wednesday Wisdom webinar, this is Professor Mani welcoming each one of you to a very unique learning session this evening. I'm delighted and honored, and it's my privilege to welcome Dr. Shravan Subramanyam, MD and CEO with GE Healthcare. Dr. Subramanyam, as the prefix says, is a doctor and a medical doctor at that, having completed his medicine from the Madras Medical College. Subsequently, over a period of time, also completed his MBA in Health and Hospital Administration from the University of Cornell. Dr. Shravan, over the last couple of years, has worked in several positions both in India, USA, and other parts of the world with leading multinational organizations such as Roche, Novartis, to name a few. He is one of those unique people who is on several committees of CII, the National Healthcare Missions, to ensure that India gets the best quality of healthcare at any given point in time. In his current role as MD and CEO of GE Healthcare, he oversees manufacturing, design, research and development, joint ventures, and is part of every major innovation and collaboration that GE Healthcare tries out in this country for the benefit of every one of us Indians at this given point in time. Dr. Shravan, it's a pleasure to have you here on behalf of BMA. Namaskar, welcome, and we're really looking forward to a wonderful learning session from you. I welcome each one of our participants and particularly our past presidents, members of the Bombay Management Association, and their guests. Let us move on now to listen to Dr. Shravan Subramanyam. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mani. If you could give me a thumbs up to let me know that you can hear me fine, I will carry on. Thank you. It's absolutely a privilege to be here. I've read about some of the luminaries who have been speaking at your forum, and truly for me, it's an honor to be invited to be in their company. I understand that you have conducted 90 or so webinars, and I really sincerely hope you score a century very soon.
Thank you.
Glad that I have a small part to play in that. Sir, you have given me a topic which to many people would seem very specific, that is healthcare and digital. And since I am both in healthcare and the digital space, it is actually a very broad topic and something that I could spend days and days talking about. And actually, I would find it very easy to talk about it for days and days because there's so much going on. But what I struggle to do is condense it into 20 or 30 minutes because there's so much going on and I want to make sure that I leave the audience with something. So I have put a few slides together mainly to show what my company is doing, GE Healthcare. But before that, I wanted to set a little bit of the context and first talk about healthcare. You mentioned digital health. The foundation is health. That is the purpose. That's why we are talking about digital in that context. And of course, the flavor of the season or the last few seasons has been COVID and the pandemic. But let me take you back to 100 years ago. 1 century ago, also, we were dealing with a similar pandemic. The Spanish influenza wiped out tens of millions of our people from around the world. When the population was actually much smaller than it is today, and it ravaged the world. 100 years ago, our average life expectancy at birth was about 35 years old. So I'll allow that to sink in for a moment. A child born in the 1910s or early 1920s could reasonably expect to live to about 35 to 40 years. And that was considered normal, that was considered acceptable. I am 42. That would that if you think about that now, I would be very afraid. However, a child today, if you look at it, the average life expectancy at birth is more than double of that. Of course, it varies from country to country. It ranges from high 60s to high 80s in some of the advanced countries like say Japan or Scandinavia. But for argument's sake, let's say it is about double. Now, what has happened in those 100 years is obviously several interventions in healthcare, antibiotics were discovered, insulin was discovered, surgical techniques were enhanced, but most importantly, public health measures were taken place, which has transformed the landscape and transformed lives, transformed the quality of life, and life expectancy has doubled in a span of 100 years. What would we expect 100 years from today? It is said that the child that is going to live to 150 has already been born. Now, let that sink in for a moment. 100 years ago, 35 was considered normal. Today, 70 is considered normal. 100 years from today, 150 will be considered normal. What do we expect to change between now and the next 100 years? To that, Professor Mani and the audience, I would argue that the intervention, the major shift is going to be digital. So that is the context I want to set for today's discussion. Digital health is all around us. And in fact, I was just looking at my watch before this started. I don't know if you can see it. It's a smartwatch, which is also tracking my pulse rate and which also has the ability to track my pulse oximetry, which is, of course, now, thanks to COVID, everybody wants to do that. And we're counting our steps. And I would argue that at least half the members of this audience probably have a device that they are wearing or that they have near access to, which is giving them an idea of their healthcare in real time. So digital health is not anything new anymore. It's very much a part of how we go about our day-to-day lives. Now, the applications for that are changing dramatically. And the outcomes, the clinical outcomes, the medical outcomes are changing for that dramatically. I'm going to leave you with a few terms. I'm going to share a few, statistics just to give a flavor of digital health. Obviously, we can't get into too much detail. And then after I share the slides, I'll open it up to questions. One of the terms that you will be reading about a lot in the context of healthcare and digital healthcare today is personalized healthcare, PHC. Some people call it PM, precision medicine. What is that? That is nothing but tailoring a medical intervention for a particular individual or a small population based on their various characteristics, including their genetic makeup, the environmental factors, and their family history, age, gender, and so on. To give you a frame of reference, when I was in medical college about 25 years ago, a diagnosis of lung cancer would typically be done by, maybe an X-ray and a crude version of a CT scan, followed by maybe a pathology. You read the slides and you look at the pathology report, and then you say, okay, this is small cell carcinoma or a non-small cell carcinoma, but the treatment is not going to change all that much. You blast the poor patient with chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and you hope for the best. They might live for 2 or 3 years in agony, and that was the course of patients who underwent lung cancer, who suffered from lung cancer those days. Fast forward to today, 2021, there are dozens and dozens of subtypes of lung cancer, which are classified and categorized based on the genetic makeup of the individual and various attributes or environmental attributes, family history attributes. And it is well nigh impossible for a clinician, an oncologist, or a surgeon to remember all these types. And in addition, there are dozens and dozens of therapies also. So of course, you still have your chemotherapy, but there are many types of chemotherapy. You have your radiotherapy, and there are types of that. And then you have targeted therapy, you have gene therapy, you have molecular therapy. There are so many different types. Therefore, now actually you can celebrate a diagnosis of cancer because there are enough and more therapies for them, which will be highly targeted, highly specific, and a machine is going to give you the inputs and information that will tell you a little bit more about what this disease is and how it can be treated, what your outcomes are. It's able to simulate a lot of these. This is not yet precise. It's still work in progress. But take, say, for example, leukemia. 25 years ago, a diagnosis of chronic myeloid leukemia was considered practically a death sentence. Today, thanks to precision medicine and the interventions of genomics and digital interventions, a patient on, say, tyrosine kinase inhibitors for leukemia are likely to outlive patients who don't have leukemia. That is how targeted therapy and genomics and digital interventions in healthcare have transformed cancer patients. So this is just a little bit to set the stage, to give you a term. Next time you're in a conversation with a clinician, you can always ask them what their opinion is on personalized healthcare and see if they get this answer correct. Chances are each person will have a different definition of it depending on the context. Speaking of context, again, coming back to COVID, I recently read an excellent report through FICCI that the consulting firm BCG had put out, saying that while we have always had computers, we have always had digital means of communication, but COVID forced people to change the way they approached healthcare. 85% of clinicians used teleconsultation and digital platforms during the lockdown. This was a very insignificant number before the lockdown, but fully 85% of clinicians have used some. It might be as simple as something like a WhatsApp video call to something more elaborate, where you're able to share some of your patterns, maybe an ECG report and blood report and teleradiology, pathology consultation. That the spectrum is very wide, but the point is digital healthcare had a major moment of reckoning over the last 10 months, and it continues to do so. 50% of these doctors were very comfortable with the digital platforms and expect to continue to use digital platforms even after the lockdown has been lifted. 80% of the teleconsultation services were from first-time users. So in 1 year, in the year 2020, 80% are first-time users, and these are people who are likely to repeat. And fully 44% of them were from non-metro cities. So the point here is this is a massive opportunity for us to transition from conventional means of therapy, conventional means of responding to patients' needs, and for patients and from the consumer side, accessing clinicians. Today, you don't have to travel from city to city anymore to have an expert consultation. You can get an ECG and an echo done in a tier 2 city and get someone in a tier 1 city to make the diagnosis for you, and someone else somewhere else to run the therapy. So the gamut is very wide, and there are so many tools that we can use. I'm going to show some of them, some of the basic tools, and then eventually take you to some of the artificial intelligence. AI is now quite a commonplace term. I'm going to share my slides with you in just a second.
Perfect.
Thank you. So yes. So I don't know if many of you are readers of the Business Standard. I'm an avid reader of the Business Standard. But about 4 years ago, there was an article which was quite puzzling. It was a front page news article of the CEO of Google saying that he is betting big on Air India. In a way, it stood to reason. Then we rationalized it, saying that, look, he is of Indian origin. And at that time, Air India was in the news for disinvestment and looking for opportunities. And Google is into vehicles and all sorts of things. So we said, okay, Google is betting big on Air India. The next day, they published an error message saying that actually, in his speech, he had said Google is betting big on AI, which was nothing but artificial intelligence. And that was the day I think India woke up and read and went on Google to understand what exactly artificial intelligence is and what it can do. To me also, that was a wake-up moment to see, okay, people around me, like today, everybody on the street is talking about RT-PCR tests. Nobody knew about it 2 years ago. Similarly, today, everybody is talking about artificial intelligence and what it can and cannot do. And I will try to share some views of what we are doing at GE and perhaps some other companies. But equally, there is also a lot that AI cannot do, and we need to be cognizant of that and set expectations that this is an evolving field. It requires a lot of data crunching, but it can have a very profound impact on clinical outcomes. So digital in general has been around forever now, right? We've been studying it in colleges, and it's been implemented in so many fields, whether it's banking or e-commerce, retail. Digital is big. Healthcare has always been a challenge because people expect and anticipate the human touch with the clinician, and it is sometimes thought of as an art as much as a science. It takes practice, it takes experience before a clinician is able to make a sound decision. But as I mentioned, pre-COVID, where healthcare was in terms of digital. Post COVID, it has reached somewhere around intermediate maturity, where perhaps banking and insurance are. But over the years, we expect that it will accelerate tremendously once we see impact on patient outcomes. That is the crux of the matter. Once patient outcomes and patient experiences start improving, digital is going to be the linchpin that drives this transformation, this transition. And COVID is on its way out for the most part with the vaccine, or even if it's not completely on its way out, we have learned to live with it and we have learned to adapt. It's no longer a new world, it's a new normal. But in the meantime, healthcare and digital health are going to keep moving forward with all the data that are coming through and what we can do with it. So what are we currently able to do and what does digital health mean? The library for this is going to be huge, but I'll share some where I have had direct experience either in my current company or in my recent past, or typically what many of you would see if you go to a lab or an outpatient setting or a hospital. um, Practically everybody would have gone to a lab. Maybe just 10 years ago, you would have to go one after you give your blood sample, you would have to go and collect a printout and say, okay, this is my report. Today, you're getting your reports practically instantaneously once the result is ready, and you're getting it online. But that itself is not a great digital intervention. What you're seeing is the analysis also and the score. So you might get a combination of various results, and the computer is able to generate a score, a risk score, for example, and say that your likelihood of getting, say, heart failure or renal disease or a thyroid problem might be X, Y, and Z, and this is the intervention that you need to take. This has now become quite commonplace. But as we are getting more data and trying out more combinations, we are getting a lot better, and the clinician is also a lot better informed for it. A lot of the data gets generated from the patients and from their surroundings, from the lab results, and also from clinical trials, etc. Um, Digital is informing the examination. I think, a couple of months ago, there was a viral video circulating on WhatsApp where the stethoscope has been entirely replaced by a tiny handheld device, where you just place it on the patient's chest, and you not only hear the beautiful lub-dub sound of the heart, it is also giving you a diagnosis and saying there might be a mitral valve stenosis or one thing or the other. So patient care is getting very personal, it's getting automated, and of course, digital. But that is in the outpatient setting, that is in the consumer setting, if you will, not necessarily sick people, but for screening and just routine monitoring. Inpatient monitoring is completely transformed. Today, you walk into an ICU, the first thing you hear is the beeping of the monitors. Now, beeping of the monitors has not been new, is not new. It has been around for a couple of decades. But what you're seeing today is integration. You're seeing an integration of the lung results, of the cardiac results, of various parameters and attributes, the electrolytes. And not only are you seeing it for one patient, you are able to see it for a cluster. You're able to slice and dice the data, and the hospital is able to say, okay, patients who have this particular initial diagnosis are more likely to have this particular kind of outcome, and they need this kind of intervention. So the interesting paradox is, the more personalized you want the treatment to be, the more data you require, right? So for N of 1, for one patient, one targeted or unique clinical approach, you need data from thousands of patients to study the data, study the patterns, and then come up with the predictive models. I'll leave medical imaging for the time being, but I'll be sharing some images of that shortly. Teleconsultation, telemedicine. Again, this was considered quite dramatic about 15 years ago, when people had to set up that INSAT 2B satellite connection to be able to see a patient remotely, and it was quite clunky. Every medical college wanted to have it, but it never really took off. Today it's normal. Today you can go to any hospital website, sign up for a teleconsultation, have a conversation with the doctor, you can share the results online, and you get a therapy. Obviously, this cannot completely replace the medical, the face-to-face conversation or the medical examination, but it can make life a lot easier for our patients. And just as e-commerce has transformed, you can't completely stop going to shops, but about 20, 30, 50%, depending on where you are, of your shopping is going to be made at the click of a button. That's what is happening very much in healthcare as well. Please note that every digital transaction, just as with a Facebook or any of your social media channels, is generating data and is helping the system to identify and understand trends. And this can be used for myriad of purposes. There are some words of caution also here that Big Brother may be watching. Could this have an implication on say insurance, on insurance premiums? So these are all questions that we need to ask ourselves. While there are interventions that are positive for healthcare, how can some of this be abused? Can privacy be abused, and can this affect payment, etc.? So these are open questions. We don't have easy answers to them, but the point is the dialogue is open for this. Now, teleradiology, telepathology. Teleradiology is an interesting one, especially when there is a paucity of trained radiologists, or if radiologists are available, but they need to be very specialized. Today, you might study radiology, but there might be people who are specifically experts in, say, neuroradiology or renal radiology, kidney radiology. So you go to a scan center, you may not find that specialist. But the beauty of teleradiology is, in a matter of seconds, your image can be beamed anywhere. Same with telepathology. It happens with a slide. The image gets beamed anywhere, and an expert sitting around the world is going to be reading the report. Now, this itself is not new anymore. It has been around for 15 years. As long as the internet has been around, teleradiology and remote reporting has been around. What I'm going to speak about is really the next stage, which is where the machine itself gets involved and is going to start giving you the result. I'll share that in a second. This is what I was talking earlier about the ICU. You hear all those bips and bleeps, but now today, if you go to some of the large hospitals, like I had gone to Medanta Hospital recently, the chief cardiologist is sitting back in his seat, and he has an array of monitors, like security cameras, where he's able to track the cardiac movements of several patients at a time, and then you see a light flashing here and a sound going off there. You're able to scale up dramatically, and eventually this reduce the cost burden for patients if you're able to consolidate some of these activities, and ultimately using these data recognition patterns, you're able to provide better clinical and therapeutic interventions. So now coming back to our friend, Mr. Pichai, he started off, I started off, of course, with a minor parody of his Air India comment, which was misattributed as Air India. But obviously, Google is big on this. They have AI-driven powered cars, and of course, the search engine. And he is talking about this being probably the most important thing humanity has worked on. It's going to have a profound impact in healthcare, and this might be where we see the next 100 years transforming both the quality and duration of life. This is an example of AI from my company, GE Healthcare. It uses the Edison platform. It's named Edison after the founder of General Electric, who was also the inventor of the light bulb and one of the early pioneers of X-ray technology, who collaborated 100 plus years ago to develop X-ray for clinical applications. And GE is one of the leading companies in the world for X-ray, CT scan, MRI, etc. That is any imaging system. So I was speaking earlier about teleradiology being a tool whereby physicians or radiologists would be detecting and diagnosing disease. Here, the computer in real time is uh, calling out the potential spots and saying that it's just like self-driving, like an autopilot car these days. The computer is telling you these patches are most likely lung nodules, and some versions of it are going to tell you what type of lung nodule it is. And if you combine artificial intelligence in radiology and pathology, you are going to get a very precise molecular diagnosis on what this lung nodule would be. And if you add to this a layer of intelligence from the therapeutics side, so screening, diagnostics, and therapeutics are coming together through artificial intelligence, and you're going to get a packaged result, a personalized result, saying with X percentage probability, it is this particular molecular variety of small cell carcinoma, and with this percentage of probability, it is likely to be treated successfully by, say, Perjeta or Tecentriq or any number of targeted therapies which work for a particular molecular biomarker. Here is another example of an MRI where over time the machine has learned to recognize the signals that are coming from solid tissues or liquid tissues, and it is able to automatically create a sharper image. Again, this is not new to us, people who have been using a smartphone for the last 10 years, where our smartphone is able to make an image more crisp. Here, over time, the machine learns to make the distinction, and then it automatically gives you a sharper result by improving the signal to noise ratio. It might seem simple to us, and we say, so what? But this could be the difference. This could be what can really help a clinician make a clearer diagnosis, which will lead to a better outcome for the patient. Very quickly, also want to share that today no company can by itself claim to solve any major problem, right? We need to work as an ecosystem, and GE works with an ecosystem of startups where this Edison platform is open for startups to come in and collaborate. Either GE would share data or share resources, in some cases invest, and say, okay, now we'll be part of a larger ecosystem so that each one of these entities can solve one piece of the puzzle. And once we put all these pieces of the puzzle together, we are able to solve for something larger. Here are some other examples. I mean, each of these would be a separate talk by themselves, but these are companies that we have partnered with using artificial intelligence for a clearer, more crisp diagnosis of MRI, magnetic resonance imaging of the spine. Similarly for X-ray. Today, by the way, X-ray and CT scan are most prolifically used for managing COVID, not as a primary diagnosis, but as a supporting diagnostic. And the computer is going to tell you whether the patient has COVID or not. You don't need a radiologist anymore. The computer is able to detect this. Similarly, for brain and for cardiac and for lung, there are so many applications where a computer is doing a part of the job of the clinician and substantially reducing the time spent by a radiologist, so that they can instead use that time for sharper diagnosis, more precise conversations with the referring clinician or the oncologist or the neurologist. Some people raise the question, will AI or will the digital interventions reduce the humanity of the clinical interface? And it is possible. When you're having a conversation over WhatsApp, rather than having a patient, a physician physically examine you, some things can be lost. But I think there is a counterpoint there to say that when machines are taking up a lot of your routine tasks and automating them and giving better outcomes, that allows the clinician to spend more quality time with the patient, understanding them and understanding their context better, to provide an overall therapeutic approach to the patient. So deep learning will enable deep empathy, indirectly, but quite likely. So I leave you with one thought, and this I actually read this in the Economist. This is about flying, but it can equally apply to radiology and pathology, and that is, um, what do you need for a plane to fly successfully? You need, and they gave an example. They said you require the computer, of course, the autopilot which is running the plane. You need a pilot and you need a dog. What is the purpose of each of them? The purpose of the computer is to fly the plane. The purpose of the pilot is to feed the dog, and the purpose of the dog is to bite the pilot if he goes anywhere near the computer, because the computer is doing a much better job of flying. So the same thing, I can take the liberty of saying this because I'm a doctor, but I would argue that the same analogy can apply to a teleradiology or a telepathology situation, where sometimes you're better off if the doctor stays away and lets the machine, lets the computer, and lets the digital tool do the work, because you're going to get a faster, more precise result. And then you can focus on other things, which are understanding the patient, understanding the context, and supporting the overall patient journey. So this is just to give you a sample of what digital health is about. This is by no way a deep course on it, but I just want to leave you with the thought that there are so many applications, and our life is going to be profoundly changed by digital health. The government is also involved, companies are involved, consumers and individuals are involved. It takes a whole ecosystem to make this tick, but it is a very exciting time to be in healthcare thanks to digital. Professor Mani, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really honored to be here with you, and I'd like to open it up for any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shravan. That was very fascinating, and I must appreciate the fact that you completed what you wanted to share with sufficient time remaining for discussions. A lot of what you said was very thought provoking. And as you rightly said, things have started changing and will change in steps over a period of time. On that note, let's look up at some of the questions and share them with you. Based on your experience in working across different countries, how ready do you think India is for this revolution in digital health? How much have we achieved? And what are some of the milestones we can expect?
So it's interesting that you asked this question, Professor, because the article that I was referring to, which mentioned how India has transformed during COVID, uses the term leapfrog very, very liberally. And I think that's where India is. We are we are poised, as we did in say communications or e-commerce. We are poised to be at the forefront because we have the medical infrastructure, we have the digital infrastructure. Now the question is, how do we marry the two? So what is stopping us? What is the rate limiting step? There are a couple of things there. Now, one of them is data integrity. The second thing is interoperability of said data. Data integrity is a problem because we still allow a lot of manual intervention. Today, if you go into a lab or a hospital, if you just allow, if like in the airplane example, if you just allow the computer to do its job and you gather all the data and standardize how it is used, I think you will be quite comfortable with the outcomes that are there. But we have a tendency for human intervention. We have a little bit of art mixed with science. And so the data that are coming out from clinical interventions is not that clean and not that well structured. We need to have a lot more discipline. We need to work on evidence-based medicine and evidence-based protocols. That once you standardize the protocols, then you get the data and you're able to work with it. The second piece that I mentioned is interoperability. Now you take a country like Singapore or Taiwan, say Hong Kong, where the government takes a decision and says, this is the platform on which the whole healthcare system is going to work. And overnight, everybody complies with it. They have to comply with it because they're part of the same system. And then there is a lot of interoperability between from one health system to the next. And we can use that information to to make necessary changes to the system or for the clinical interventions, etc. So when you consider that here today, you go to hospital A, they're using one platform, hospital B, they're using another platform. They don't like sharing information with each other. And even if they're okay with it, there are questions raised around privacy, etc. So we need to standardize the data protocols and we need to standardize the interoperability. Teleradiology has managed to do that through this DICOM system. All radiology reports are transmitted through a standardized protocol. That needs to happen across the health system. The government is working assiduously towards standardizing that. They're getting inputs from the healthcare system. Once that happens, I believe we have the tools to leap from and be at par with the rest of the world.
That's very reassuring to hear, and I'm sure with people like you at the helm of affairs, in all the best of organizations, we can expect to see this dream into a reality as soon as possible. Another interesting question that's there with me is how much of this is implementable in India, and how different is it from implementing in Bharat, as the jargon goes, when we are talking about rural India? How easy or how difficult? Please share some of your experiences.
So India, I think, as you have alluded to in your question itself, is not one country. And it's not even just India and Bharat. Within India and Bharat, you have so many dissimilarities, the primary health center, secondary, tertiary, rural, urban, corporate, and the mom and pop shop. So the sheer diversity of healthcare systems in India makes it extremely challenging to standardize this and take advantage of our digital capabilities. Having said that, we are making, I would say, steps rather than strides in the right direction, whether it's in pathology or radiology, where one by one these things are getting standardized, whether it is through large vendors and companies like say a GE, which has helped to standardize radiology, and there are other companies that are standardizing other parts of it. But adoption is very patchy. I actually think that there is a huge opportunity in Bharat because healthcare access is one of the big problems that we are grappling with. And access to healthcare can be solved through many different ways. It could be through pricing, and the government is working on saying, okay, how can we make healthcare more affordable to Bharat, if you will. But we need a little bit of skill building, where just because you have access to a particular therapy or a diagnostic tool, if you don't have the right people to operate them, it's going to be very difficult to get any result out of it. And the third piece is going to be digital. So I think digital is going to give an opportunity to raise the level of healthcare access in rural India and tier 2 cities and smaller hospitals, and bring about that parity in standardization of healthcare. It's a challenge, sir. It's not going to be easy, but one that we have understood, and that one that we are all working on together.
Great, good to hear that. Another important point is in health sciences domain, though skilling is something which is widely acceptable, very often certification is mandatory for employment purposes. And I know that the National Health Bill is trying to look at some of the changes for the better. Would you share some of your wisdom on this domain, which is so very important to us?
Sure. Actually, rather than my wisdom, I might try and paraphrase the wisdom of Dr. Devi Shetty of Narayana, where he has given a lot of statistics about the number of doctors, number of nurses, number of paramedical staff available in India versus the requirement of that. And the requirement is exponentially higher. We need a lot more. So now it becomes a little tricky. While we want the best case scenario, we want most highly qualified and trained people for every intervention. In India, it is going to take a while before we get there. It's a question of capacity building while we are skilling. So in the interim, can we employ digital tools to support the medical professionals who may be less qualified or less experienced and use tools such as telemedicine, teleradiology, etc., to scale up the healthcare access. So those are some opportunities that we have where we get, it's a combination of both skill and scale. You need to skill up if you want to be able to scale up, right? And what are the skills that are required? Here again, I can speak from GE's experience. We have an entire team dedicated to education, not the training of the equipment, that is standard, that is expected, but we have a team that goes to rural areas. Right now, we've just signed an MOU with Tata Trust, for example, to educate 6,000 youth, to give them the basic training required for the equivalent of vocational skills in healthcare, so that they can help maybe in a scan center or a primary health center, to just about give enough support to be able to scale up rapidly. Now, once you have that scale and you have that basic access to healthcare, then you need to keep improving the skills. So let's not lose focus on where we need to be. There is an aspirational target, but there are many steps in which we need to get there, and skilling is absolutely critical. I think, of course, coming from an academic background such as yourself, I'm sure you very well recognize that.
True. I think sometimes the conflict is that the person is highly skilled, but the certification process in the country is still not standardized, and therefore employment becomes a challenge. And as you rightly said, we are trying to take the right steps, but maybe it will take a little more time for the whole system to fall into place. That, I
Indeed.
guess, is an anxiety for many aspirants who want to get into the new streams in medical education, particularly on the skilling side. We have with us Inderpal Singh ji, who's our former president of BME and a very senior industry professional. Over to you, Inderpal ji.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Mr. Subramanyam, I am aware of the fact that GE Healthcare has been doing wonderful work in developing and marketing devices at a fraction of a cost as compared to what they're available in the West. And, many new devices, they're coming out, machines, they're coming out at a low cost. But despite all this, the overall costs of healthcare have been rising. And I think Dr. Devi Shetty is one of the, very strong proponent of how to lower healthcare costs overall so that more people can have access given our income levels. So do you see this happening, or the nexus of the pharma companies and the medical practitioners, etc., are determined to keep on pushing the healthcare costs?
I think, Inderpalji, this is a very important question that we need to address together as a community, because yes, there is perhaps a push for marketing products and bringing them in. I would say with a clear conscience that some of the companies that I have worked with are doing this for medical betterment. But of course, it could be possible that people are pushing a drug or pushing a therapeutic intervention for the purpose of making a quick buck. A couple of points here, right? And you can't walk away from the point that you made, that there is an excess, and there could be a push for profiting and profiteering. I think profiting is fine, but profiteering should absolutely not be accepted in a country, in a resource limited country like ours. I think the question is so a couple of things are coming up, right? What is the cost of an intervention in India versus the rest of the world? There we are still, although costs are rising, we are still amongst the cheapest countries in the world for most therapies. You take say a stenting procedure, here it will cost you about 1 lakh. Whereas in the US, it will cost you nothing short of 20 lakhs. And you have the whole range in between. Say Singapore would be somewhere in between, Thailand would be between an India and a Singapore. You take a thyroid test, you can get it at ThyroCare for a couple of hundred rupees. Whereas in the US, it's going to cost you a couple of $100. So objectively, if you look at the costs of healthcare in India versus the rest of the world, we are still doing very well in terms of amongst the lowest costs. But there are some learnings that we can have. because in India, majority of healthcare payment is out of pocket. So it pinches us. In Europe or many parts of Asia and most of the US, it is paid for by third parties, by your company insurance or by the government. And so it doesn't pinch the individual. And healthcare cost suddenly becomes very real and very relevant for us because we are paying for it out of pocket. So there, it opens up the question: how do we defray the cost of this? In Europe, which now has a fairly advanced, and including UK, very advanced system of reimbursement through, say, the NHS in UK, and each country has their own version of it. Basically, the young and the healthy are subsidizing the old and the sick. Um, and that is just the natural way how insurance works. But here, when you're paying out of pocket, there is no incentive for a young and healthy to pay for the treatment of an old and sick. So that's where government intervention is required, policy interventions are required, insurance companies need to get together. That is already starting from the 90s itself. We've had health insurance coming up, and the last 10 years has seen a significant boom in healthcare insurance, but it is still not comprehensive. It still does not accommodate or account for outpatient management, outpatient therapeutics, outpatient diagnostics. So, and the majority, the bulk of your healthcare expenditure is coming from outpatient. So we're solving a few pieces of the puzzle, but this is a very, very tough one to solve. I think you can take comfort in the knowledge that as healthcare costs are going up, the healthcare outcomes are also improving. The patients are outliving cardiac disease, they're outliving cancer, and so as I mentioned, our average life expectancy has gone up by almost 1 year every year. So one could argue that there is merit in spending a little bit more because your quality and quantity of life are going up. But that doesn't mean it should go up indiscriminately. I think we all have some accountability there to make sure that this is rationalized.
All right, I'm now handing over to another person who's a very senior professional from the pharmaceutical industry, him having a lot of experience himself. Rajesh, over to you for your question.
Thank you, Professor Mani, and thank you, Dr. Shravan, for a very enlightening, discussion. And as Professor Mani mentioned, I come from pharma industry, and I was wondering if this whole journey of transformation to the AI and using the digital, how pharma industries do you think can pharma companies do you think can collaborate with the healthcare for the better outcomes and collaborative, outcomes for the patient's benefit? If you can throw some light on that, that will be really helpful.
Absolutely, sir. Having come from the pharma industry myself, prior to this, I was with Novartis and Roche, and I've seen the profound impact that pharma companies have had using digital. I'll give you a couple of examples, but very broadly, the interventions from the pharma industry can either come in the preclinical phase, before it goes to the routine patient use, where, say, it is in clinical trials and drug development, to after it is in patient use. I'll give an example in drug development. I've during my time at Novartis, I was part of a global strategy based in the US. I used to work with tech companies in that have come out of MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they would develop entire libraries of genomic data and potential therapeutic outcomes based on real world evidence without touching a single patient, just through data that have been collected through routine interventions. So imagine, say 10 years ago, you might spend about 1 year and maybe 2 years and $100 million for the initial preclinical or phase 1 of a clinical trial to obtain the genomic data of a whole cohort of potential patients. Today, you're able to do that by just trawling the medical data from various hospital information systems, and you're simulating that data and providing it at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time. Theoretically, that will improve the clinical trial outcomes and eventually have some downstream applications for patients. Similarly, come to after the drug is launched, the data that are being generated from patient interventions, whether it's inpatient from the hospital or outpatient, you're gathering all that data, and that's going to a receptacle, which whereby you're able to follow patterns and trends. And very often, the initial indication for which a drug is launched will get changed over the years as you get more real world data. And now we're able to do that at scale because you're getting data from around the world, and you're able to correlate and understand that data practically in real time. Of course, in pharmaceutical terms, real time might be 1 year. I don't mean literally real time, but what might have taken three to 5 years, you're able to do in 3 to 6 months. So that's where we see the interventions there. And I think pharma companies also have the deep pockets that allow them to invest in this kind of research and work closely with research institutions to get some of the best outcomes. But thank you, sir, for your service in the pharma industry, because that is making healthcare better for all of us.
Thank you.
I'm now moving on to another industry veteran who's been an entrepreneur for many years. Shankar, will you just unmute and go ahead with your question, please?
Mr. Subramanyam, Dr. Subramanyam, recently the Supreme Court, I guess, passed a judgment that TPAs are not allowed to decide on any claims, right? They can only recommend to the insurance company. But whereas in the practices, in all the medical it is a TPA who's even sending the check. Do you see any changes because of the judgment?
So honestly, I have not studied that judgment, so I can't respond to that with much real inputs. But I think where we are going to see a difference is now with the data being made more freely available, and you're able to sort through and analyze data. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine is a fairly senior person at one of these companies that their only job is to parse through insurance data and see whether a claim is accurate or fraudulent, or whether it has clinical merit and whether it has economic merit. So that has spawned a whole industry to see that the journey that a patient's medical record takes, from medical record to until payment is done, is structured and fully validated. So at least I can say that we have that process in place so that enforcement will be easier. I don't have a view on the role of a TPA versus an insurance company in adjudicating this, but I see hope that with the available information and the data that we have, and the entrepreneurs and the companies that are able to sift through this data, understanding that, reporting it, and enforcing it will be much easier.
All right. I think I'm coming to the concluding session because we respect your time. It has been a very fascinating discussion, but as we say, it's good to start on time and also keep an eye on the watch. The next interesting question is, in the corporate world, as you are already aware, we talk about Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. Is there a similar phenomenon existing in the medical practitioner segment? And if so, how do they respond to the changes, especially the digitalization of healthcare?
Sir, I'll answer that very simply. It is my dad's generation and my generation. So my dad spent his whole life behind a microscope. He was a pathologist, and whether it's him and his classmates and his peer group, people that I have met over the years, I would ask them why they're still looking through a microscope when digital microscopes and digital pathology has already been in vogue for the last 10 years. They would say, you don't know what you're talking about. I trust my eyes, I trust my judgment. But you ask any of my classmates and my peer group, they would not touch a conventional microscope. They're going to look through digital lens, see the image on the screen, and take advantage of artificial intelligence to initially understand the report and give a provisional diagnosis and a provisional therapeutic. Of course, I'm being a little glib here, and please indulge me. There are people in my dad's generation who are extremely tech savvy, and there are people from my peer group who still trust their eyes and prefer to operate through a microscope. But you do see that trend changing a lot. And 10 years ago, teleradiology was not very common. Today, every single radiology center operates a teleradiology platform to store and transmit data. So that change is happening. I would not go so much by age, but more by what is the preference and desired clinical outcome that a clinician is looking for. And there's nothing good or bad, right or wrong about it. I think it's just a personal preference.
All right, and there's an extended question to this. Is medical care improving in the government segment? This is an area which is a big concern in India. Though around COVID times, we've heard a lot of great stories of how government hospitals have risen to the occasion. And rightly so, the vaccination privileges have been given to them to begin with. Would you care to share some of your observations based on experience?
Absolutely, sir. I would very willingly put myself through a diagnosis and therapy at my alma mater, Madras Medical College and Government General Hospital. They have some of the best technology and the best, most skilled technologists and clinicians there. Of course, I'm giving an example. I'm partial to MMC and GH being an alumnus, but you go all around India and there are some amazing government hospitals which are offering the best treatment from around the world. Probably, it might be a little crowded and may not be as fancy or decorated as some of our other hospitals. But in terms of technology and therapeutic outcomes, we have some of the best government hospitals in the world.
I guess it's just that people have to regain and restore the confidence that they have in these hospitals. Could be because of one stray bad experience, one tends to pass judgment.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful, Dr. Shravan. It's been such a educative session with you. Straight from the heart is all I can say. And that too from a medical practitioner who is now heavily using the digital technology to ensure that good healthcare is available to every citizen in the country. I'm going to request my colleague on the executive committee of the Bombay Management Association, Rajesh Sharma, to do a wrap up and also propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the Bombay Management Association. Over to you, Rajesh.
Thank you, Professor Mani. And Dr. Shawn, I must say that as Professor Mani mentioned, that this session was right from the heart in a very, very simplified manner that the audience was able to understand the whole journey of the AI in the medical field, I will say, and the kind of knowledge and the experience and the ground reality which you are aware of really amazed me. The kind of developments which are happening and the way you have put it. Thank you very much for a very enlightening session. We are thankful to you for sparing out time and being with us. We look forward to much more interactions with you in future as well. And thank you very much, Professor Mani, for being always be there as a good host and also bringing in such good faculties for these sessions. All the office team working at the back end and all the participants. Some of the participants like Inderpal Singh ji, I find sparing time every time and being there in these sessions. So thank you very much, everyone, and for this session. That's Mani.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajesh. And trust me, it's such a delight listening to people like Dr. Shravan. And
Yes.
I think many of us have attended these webinars more regularly than all the classes that we have attended in college. But that's a matter of another discussion. At this point in time, let's get together for a group photograph with Dr. Shravan. May I request all of you to put on your videos? And I request the team from our secretariat, Deepa, Supriya, Lakshmi, Oindrila, all of them do a lot of hard work behind the scenes. And one of the good things they do is they take lovely digital photographs. so that we can keep a nice memory of this time that we have spent with Dr. Shravan this evening. While all of you gear up for this group photograph, please be a little patient, as they call digital patients. We have 3 screens to cover, so just give them the time to capture all your smiles. I'm happy to share with you that the next 2 sessions which we have are very unique sessions again. Day after tomorrow, we are taking a trip down memory lane into ancient Indian wisdom and scriptures. And this is being presented by 2 people. Dhruv Chatralia, who's an international attorney based in London, spends all his spare time researching the Bhagavad Gita and trying to suggest how Bhagavad Gita can be used for managing people in organizations. So Dhruv is speaking to us on Friday from 5 to 6, logging in all the way from London. Followed by our very own revered Guru by the name of Guru Vishakha Hari. She hails from South India, and she is going to talk to us about effective people management and what we can learn from ancient Indian scriptures. This is going to be a session with a difference. I hope you've already registered at the PMA links, and we look forward to meet you this Friday evening. Next Wednesday, we have the chairman and managing director of Cabin Care India. Most of us will know Cabin Care was the organization that revolutionized the market of small products in the consumer segment by introducing shampoo sachets. And they say rest is history. Mr. C.K. Ranganathan, founder, chairman and managing director, will be gracing the occasion next Wednesday to talk to us about how he built this Indian super brand called Cabin Care. So look forward to have you for these 2 sessions. I get a thumbs up from the team that they've captured all our smiles. Thank you ever so much, Dr. Shravan. It was indeed a pleasure meeting you, though digitally, and we look forward to our continued interaction. Thank you, everybody, for this meaningful session. We had about 60 people present through this event today who have carried back a lot of wisdom with them. Thank you, everybody. Namaskar.
Namaskar.